Thank you for joining me for this Belonging in Utah special, where we are taking a look at Japanese American history here in Utah. We start with Topaz. During World War II, thousands of Japanese Americans found themselves in our state, forced to live in the middle of nowhere. 16 miles outside of the town of Delta in central Utah lies a massive stretch of desert. This is the site where the U.S. government ran the Central Utah Relocation Center. It was later renamed Topaz.
The camp opened on September 11th, ironically, 1942.
Topaz was one of 10 internment camps formed in the United States during World War II. The U.S. government forced thousands of Japanese Americans and those of Japanese descent to live in these camps. Why did they force Japanese Americans to leave the West Coast?
Well, they said it was national security. They said, if you look like the enemy, you will help the enemy.
Jane Beckwith.
This section is very complicated.
Is the founder of the Topaz Museum.
I think of all of the displays that we did in this museum, the most difficult was to try to show tangibly that people lost their civil rights.
They brought them across the country on a rickety old train.
Beckwith is a former Delta High School English teacher. She says the idea of having Topaz Museum started off as a classroom assignment back in 1982.
Just come look at this.
The goal was to get students into the community and learn about the people connected to Topaz.
When I sent my students into Delta to interview people, they'd never been interviewed. And so they would say things like, oh, I think I still have something that my friend gave me. We ended up with a great big trunk of all kinds of things from Topaz. And after I lugged that around for a while, I thought, man, why isn't there a museum?
That sparked a movement to build this museum. It took time, building community connections, and ultimately lots of this to make it happen.
I knew it was going to take a while. I mean, as a teacher, you don't ever raise this kind of money. I mean, you have a bake sale or something, but so we just kept plugging along.
Every block is organized the same way.
That plugging along eventually paid off. In 2017, this 8,000 square foot museum opened its doors, giving visitors a closer look at a significant piece of Utah's Japanese American history and its ties to this space known as Topaz. Thousands of Japanese Americans were forced to live in Topaz during World War II, but plans to build the site almost didn't happen in central Utah. From 1942 until 1945, thousands of people of Japanese descent ended up at Topaz Internment Camp, located about 2 hours southwest of Salt Lake City, just outside of the town of Delta in central Utah.
Most of the people who came from California were from San Francisco in Topaz.
As Topaz Museum founder Jane Beckwith explains, Topaz almost didn't happen at this location.
There was a guy named Robert Cousins who was working for the soldiers, the military in California, and he was sent on a mission to go find a place that had access to the railroad, that had electricity available, that had adequate water, and a small town that would not be against that. So he came here and he looked on the mountains over there and he said, it's just not a good place. And my dad wrote a little article in his newspaper saying we were rejected. There was a local Delta realtor who actually went to the Presidio and said, oh no, I can get all the water that you need, I can get all the land, I can do everything. So he became kind of the in-charge guy.
While things were getting in motion, there was a postal problem.
The original name of this site was Central Utah Relocation Center. The guy who was helping put in a post office said, you want me to write that on every form that I have to fill out? I can't do it.
This camp was actually named after the nearby mountains, the Topaz Mountains, so it became Topaz Internment Camp. There were approximately 11,000 Japanese Americans who were processed here.
They can put things in storage. If they put them with the government, then they can write to the government and say, would you send this? And so that happened. I mean, there were pianos that were sent here so people could still practice music.
But it still wasn't a normal life like what they were used to.
And what our museum, I mean, our basic tenet is this was wrong, that this didn't need to happen, that people were punished who had done nothing. They just looked like the enemy.
The big question is, for those who were forced to live at Topaz, what was the experience like?
So we have dressers that were made there, we have chairs that were made there.
These artifacts put into perspective what it was like living in Topaz during World War II.
You know, this model, we base it on facts, it's to scale. The recreated barrack is to scale. The artifacts that are in there are mostly exactly from Topaz.
Jane Beckwith, the Topaz Museum's founder, says that it wasn't easy showcasing items and explaining the hardships Japanese Americans faced in Topaz, living behind barbed wire, struggling emotionally while under constant surveillance by armed guards because of their race.
That was very hard. I mean, we could show the artwork and say how creative they were, or we could have a panel about dance classes or something like that. But to talk about the civil rights denials, that was hard.
Beckwith says that the camp size for where families lived was about 1 square mile, 640 acres approximately. The Topaz site in its entirety covered 31 square miles.
Because it had farms, it had a cattle ranch, it had a chicken farm, it had a turkey operation.
More than 19,000 acres was designated for farming. As history records show, it was all by design by the U.S. government.
Because they were trying to make them be self-sufficient.
Topaz consisted of 42 blocks, and you can see the outlines of those blocks from above. The majority of those blocks each housed 250 people. The barracks where people slept were not insulated. Outside walls consisted of pine boards and covered with tar paper, with inside walls made of sheetrock. Residents here suffered living through extreme hot and cold desert temperatures and dust storms. Was the goal to keep the Japanese Americans here? Was that the goal?
No, I actually think the goal was for them to leave, but not go back to California. They didn't have to work, but if they worked, they were paid a piddling amount. They were making between like $14 and $19 a month. So if they were a doctor, Japanese American doctor, they were making 19.
Japanese Americans living in Topaz did what they could to create a life that mimicked what they once knew, with schooling, recreation, and cultural events, all with the looming pain of being under watchful suspicion during World War II. The person you're about to meet is on a mission to gather stories from her community from that pivotal time in our nation's history, aiming to make sure they're not forgotten.
It is so vast. It is an enormous space. It is overwhelming.
Mentioning Topaz can stir up unresolved feelings and questions for people with ties here.
That's so deeply personal to me because my family was, one of the 125,000 plus families that were sent to camp.
Diana Tsushida, a Bay Area, California resident, is the creator of an oral history project and journal called Teisaku, which means iron fence. Its mission is to preserve and share stories of Japanese Americans who were incarcerated during World War II.
We really are at the end of generations where they experienced this, and now we're coming down to my generation where I'm just a descendant of my father who was in camp, my grandparents who really had the harder time.
Tsushida says her grandfather, Tamatsu Tsushida, couldn't stand idly by, watching injustices unfold at the internment camp.
He was very vocal and he was arrested multiple times in camp, and in Topaz actually he got in so much trouble to the extent that he was taken out of camp and sent to a citizen isolation center in Loop, Arizona.
Family separation was just another layer of lasting trauma that would impact Sushida's grandfather and others sharing his fate.
He was kept there for about 6 or 7 months until they sent him up to Tule Lake, which was the biggest segregation center of so-called disloyals in Northern California.
Her grandfather, Tamatsu, still refused to stay silent and was arrested and separated from his family again at the end of World War II, not being released until February of 1947.
My grandparents went through quite a bit, and my grandpa talked about it until his old age. I really think he probably died with that on his heart. You know, he could not let it go, that experience.
As you'll hear from some survivors, sharing their experiences meant going back to memories that they've tried to forget. Topaz is woven into the fabric of Utah's history and in the memories of thousands of Japanese Americans who lived in this internment camp during World War II.
There's still a lot of intergenerational trauma that I think the community is still dealing with today in terms of the fallout from the camps.
Diana Sushida of the Bay Area, California, is a descendant of Topaz Internment camp survivors and says she learned about her father's family's history because they shared it.
The really, incredible and tragic thing about the camps is that it created these situations that the Japanese American community did not even need to be put through.
Sushida also says she understands why older relatives in other Japanese American families stay silent.
It just is a lot of factors, a lot of shame, I think, that was internalized because of the incarceration, and many cultural aspects too that kind of blended into this issue of no one wanting to share the truth about what happened during the war.
That was a real education for so many.
All of this fascinated U of U's Department of Communications distinguished professor, Dr. Kent Ono. He made many findings while earning his doctorate in Japanese incarceration rhetoric.
The historical rhetoric that Japanese Americans had just gone off to these camps and didn't really say anything about it.
Dr. Ono says everybody's not on the same page with certain aspects of this history.
Students of Japanese American history have decided to either call them concentration camps or detention centers.
Dr. Ono, who's of Japanese descent, says his immediate family members were spared from living in internment camps.
People like my family in Wyoming and in Utah were mostly not incarcerated, right? Because they didn't pose the military threat of being on the coast and being part of an attack by Japan. But what's totally fascinating, which people have not really spent much time thinking about, is that Utah was sort of the epicenter for Japanese Americans during World War II.
The Topaz Museum says Japanese Americans could leave Topaz as long as they were heading east, away from California and going for a job or to school. They couldn't return to California until January of 1945. Now, coming up, some of the Japanese Americans who came to Utah stayed away from Topaz. Up next, we're going to show you how they started life over at a place that they called Keetley Farm. Welcome back. Some Japanese Americans decided to bravely face the challenges in rebuilding their lives and avoiding internment camps during World War II. Many of them ended up here in Utah at a place called Keetley Farm in Wasatch County. During World War II, the space where the Jordanelle Reservoir now sits was once Keetley Farm.
Well, my mother and my father were one of the first ones to arrive.
Mary Wada Roth says her parents were cutting it close, arriving to this place right before the deadline of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's Executive Order 9066.
They were told that they had 38 days to either go into internment camp, or self-evacuate to a different inland state.
Fred Wada, Mary's father, was instrumental in bringing roughly 130 Japanese Americans to Keetley. Before arriving, Utah's then Governor Herbert B. Maw connected Wada to George Fisher.
But my father, time was running short and he had to find something. So Mr. Fisher he had 3,800 acres and he was asking $7,500 a year to lease the land.
Mary says her father put down $500 to secure the lease and later paid off the $7,000 balance.
And when my mother, driving down into Keetley, saw the old shack and this dilapidated town, and it was all covered in deep snow, you can imagine, she just started to cry because she realized that they were bringing all these people here.
You have to understand, too, that while we were in Keetley, I believe it was as hard, if not harder, than anyone in the concentration camp. We were on our own. We lived in poverty in Keetley.
There was a reason for that, as fellow Keetley Farm survivor Howard Yamamoto explains.
This was one of the stipulations Mr. Wada made. If you let us in, we do not want any help from the government, the city.
That meant starting over, building a new life from the ground up.
The terrain was horrible. I mean, they had to remove tons and tons of rocks and sagebrush and boulders.
On top of that, the new residents experienced some threatening moments.
Someone had thrown dynamite near one of the buildings, trying to frighten them off. And the strangest thing is, months later, the person who did throw the dynamite was a young Indian man who worked at the mines, joined the Keetley baseball team and apologized for what he had done when they first came in there.
Keetley Farm would not have existed without the help of a Salt Lake man who helped to pave the way for those who took refuge here.
Was a term I finally figured out.
The late Whittle of Salt Lake City is the granddaughter of businessman and rancher George A. Fisher.
He was also a poet, and he just loved to write.
She says long before the Jordanelle Reservoir existed, Fisher owned 3,800 acres of land in Wasatch County.
He and his brother came to that area in 1917 with plans of buying up the land and the property. There were families already living there.
Her grandfather's scrapbook helped Whittle better understand his life during World War II.
The newspaper clippings in particular are very interesting. That's my grandfather on a horse out in the middle of what is now covered with either water or homes.
George A. Fisher preserved some of Utah's little-known history, specifically about a group of Japanese Americans who came and transformed his land into Keetley Farm.
Although it has never been a ghost town, it took a determined group of 100 Japanese headed by an Oakland merchant to make a boom town out of half-deserted Keetley, so there's a little hope there.
Fisher caught wind of the challenges Fred Wada and his small Japanese colony faced trying to secure a safe place to live and farm and avoid internment camps.
When George A. originally decided to explore making Keetley available, he was concerned about the legality of it. So he wrote to Dan Shields, the United States Attorney, and he was told that in their opinion it doesn't have any violation of law at all.
Fisher worked to help Fred Wada. However, he faced resistance from the community.
But that was the main thing, is that my grandfather was a humanitarian in a time when he wasn't the most popular person. And people weren't afraid to say it. They didn't think they were going to be safe. They said we'd agree for them to come to Keetley, but they have to be under strict observation at all times.
With strategy, good connections, and timing, Mr. Fisher and Mr. Wada figured everything out.
And here is the contract that George A. and Fred Wada signed for leasing the property. And that was in March 24th of 1942.
The Japanese American colony transformed the soil at Keetley into productive farmland in 3 months, and many stayed in Keetley a few short years, if that long. The effort is underway to preserve the history of Keetley Farm, and up next, one of the women leading the charge and how she wants to make sure that this history isn't forgotten. Finally today, Keetley Farm was a refuge for a group of Japanese Americans during World War II, and work is now underway to help keep the memory of Keetley and its Utah ties to Japanese American history alive. How long has this trail been here?
This trail has been here since 2016, and it was finished and debuted with the ribbon cutting in 2017.
Okay, and here are the signs.
These have been here since 2022.
Chris Bayer, a Hideout Town Council member, loves the great outdoors, especially around the Jordanelle Reservoir.
So what's fascinating about Keetley is that it's a sunken town. It's underneath the Jordanelle Reservoir now.
Bayer, along with a number of local and state organizations, teamed up to form a plan to get the word out about the area's history and to preserve it. How did it make you feel knowing that you were able to help elevate the history of this space?
It made me feel really good. I did not know about the history until we discovered through an internet search, what the historical significance of Keetley was.
That led to the naming of a couple of trails in the area.
One of the Wada family members, Mary Wada Roth, found out about it, contacted the state park manager.
That's because Mary's father, Fred Wada, was instrumental in getting a small Japanese-American group to Keetley and transformed the land into a farm. He stood boldly against racial tensions and threats during World War II.
He had received a telegram from the governor saying, maybe, Mr. Wada, you should take all your people back to California, because he didn't want to be responsible for any kind of national, who knows what could have happened. My father, he said, what can I do? He says he can't take them back. They'd be all put in internment camps. And he just tore up the paper and just, forgot about it.
Years later, that and other stories from Keetley were not forgotten. In 2022, all of the survivors and their descendants would gather for the Keetley reunion at Jordanelle Reservoir. Now, 3 years later, plans are in the works to build something permanent to help keep the memory of Keetley Farm alive.
The Utah State Parks have kicked off a project to take these temporary signs and make them into permanent panels, which will be reinstalled in a more permanent location.
I'm told a target date for installing the new permanent signs hasn't been set just yet. Organizers are still working to figure out the best location for them. We want to thank you for joining me for this Belonging in Utah special, and you can see my upcoming segments every Friday in our 5 p.m. newscast. Have a good night.